Why does it matter whether we draw our straight lines freehand or use a ruler? And of course, there's no right or wrong answer. It's totally up to what an individual wants to do. Personally, I find straight lines drawn with a ruler tend to have a strong architectural drafting feel to them. And unless that's something I particularly want in my drawing, I find that it can create almost a disharmony with my other, more, if you like, casual line work. Whereas the slight imperfections with hand-drawn straight lines, personally I find blends in with the rest of the looser line work of my drawing. And also, learning to draw freehand is very practical when we're not drawing on a surface where we can use a ruler, particularly a quick sketch that's done on location in a street somewhere. So let me give you some tips and techniques I use for confident, straight, clean lines. By confident, I mean lines drawn fairly rapidly with a nice even speed. By straight, I mean straight. And by clean, I mean one line where the thickness of the line is nice and even, and particularly where we don't have a series of smaller, shorter lines overlapping each other, which can be particularly tempting to do if we lack confidence and we're drawing in pencil. Now, a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. And I find it very useful to use points to help guide my straight lines. And it's particularly useful if one of our lines is going to end out in space. It doesn't have anything yet to connect with. So let's say I've got the corner of a building here and I want to take it up at a certain angle. I can actually work out where I want this line to finish using my reference with some exactness. I often measure the angle on the reference and then bring it onto my drawing. And then I place a dot where I want it to be, and then I connect with a straight line. This helps not just with the length of the line, but the accuracy of the angle that we draw. Because at this point, I only have to concentrate on producing the nice straight line. I no longer have to work out where does it end. Have I gone far enough yet? So if we're wanting to connect lines between 2 points, what's the best way of drawing lines that are confident, clean, and straight? I find it helpful to think in this way. The more of my body I use in anything I do, the more control I have over that action. And this includes straight lines. I think the source of a lot of problem for artists is that there's a great deal of focus on their fingers and their pen and the tip of the pen. And so the control is happening down here. And the eyes are focusing here. Sometimes with better results than others. And if we're drawing a longer line, what can happen is the further the line goes, the more it begins to curve. Because when we're focusing on our fingers and the end of the pen, it's easy to start to rest our hand on the paper. And once we rest our hand in a certain spot, then any movement we make pivots on that spot. A bit like using a compass that pivots in the center of the circle. Now, obviously I've exaggerated it here, but to a lesser degree, this is the effect that can easily happen, particularly with longer lines when we're resting on the paper. It also happens if we're using our wrist to draw from. Our wrist also becomes a pivot point for our pen. The good news is it's very easy to make sure this doesn't happen. Firstly, it's important to hold the pen loosely. We don't want it to wobble around, but we're not trying to clench it tight. We just want a nice firm grip that holds it in place. Secondly, although our hand will probably, for most of us, be on the paper, we want it to be on the paper with the lightest possible touch. We don't want any weight to be on our hand. We do not want to be resting the hand on the paper. And thirdly, when we move our pen, we want to move it by using as much of our entire arm as we possibly can. right up to the shoulder. So if I'm doing a horizontal line, I keep my fingers straight, I keep my wrist straight, I keep my forearm straight, and I really can keep my elbow pretty much locked in as well. And I move my arm from my shoulder to produce this line. If I'm doing a vertical line, then I'm going to be moving my elbow as I bring the arm closer to my body, or as I push my arm further away from my body, my elbow will open and close. And so we keep our hand just touching lightly on the paper so it can smoothly glide over the paper. Another tip is not to look at the tip of the pen, not to look at the line we're drawing, but to look to where we want it to go. And that's why having a dot where we want it to go can be really helpful if there's not another line that this line is going to join. As I focus at this spot, I bring my hand towards it, and with a little practice, I can confidently trust that the line is going to end in the place I'm watching. So we glide our hand lightly over the paper. Well, whatever mistake I made there, I made twice. So we draw using the whole arm, which does mean we need to sit perhaps a little further away from our table so that there's room for our arm to move in whatever direction we want. And it's exactly the same if we're drawing lines diagonally. So just a few more quick tips. If I'm drawing a line and at some point I have a crisis of confidence, either my arm is feeling as if it's in an awkward position or I'm not sure if the line's in the right spot, the best thing to do is to pull the pen off the paper straight away and then have a good look to see, is the line in the wrong place? Is it heading to the right place? I look here and I can see that the only problem is where the pen was when I suddenly was worried that it was in the wrong place. So what I need to do now is to rejoin this line and continue to where I want it to go. My tip is don't overlap the line at all. Place the pen as close to that line as we can without actually touching it, and then very quickly continue the line. And it might be helpful just to practice that line just to get that momentum going again for where we want it to go. The reason it's best to stop and to leave a gap is because leaving a slight gap usually creates less visual disruption than having an area of overlap. My next tip is if we've drawn a line and it hasn't gone where we want it to go, draw the correct line in place. Because in the context of a finished drawing, the brain will favour the correct line and the incorrect line won't be as obvious. But if our brain only has the incorrect line to look at, it's going to look not quite right. And there's no other information for the brain to use but that incorrect line. And the good news is that having just drawn a line in the wrong place, it's actually easier to correct that and draw it in the right place because we still have the feel of the movement of putting the line in the wrong place, and we can make adjustments for that in our second go. And another good tip is to do with our paper. For most of us, there will be lines in certain directions which are easier to draw than other directions. So as a right-handed person, I find drawing lines from left to right is easier than trying to draw them from right to left, where I'm having to push the pen across the paper. I find I get smoother lines if I can drag the pen across the paper. Similarly with vertical lines, generally I do better pulling the pen down from top to bottom. Now where we have diagonal lines, I find it much easier to go from lower to upper, from left to right, than to do the other. But it's important to remember that we can turn our paper. So I can draw a line this way, and then I can turn my paper and I can draw the other line also in that same direction, which is easiest for me to draw. The other good thing is that it's very easy to practice straight lines. Draw two parallel lines that are as far apart as you think you can confidently draw a straight line. And then join them up. This also gives practice at stopping the line where we want it to stop without slowing down, because the longer the nib is in contact with the paper, the more ink will soak into the paper. And so if we change the speed of our line, the line gets thicker. And sometimes if we have a very long straight line to draw, longer than we feel confident to do in one go, we can divide it into two and hopefully do a better job than I did just then. That's the line I wanted. But often the lines we need to draw are not nearly as long. But being able to draw a series of straight lines relatively closely together, nice and briskly, can be a really useful skill when we're doing quick sketches, particularly on location. So if you're someone who does use a ruler for most of their straight lines still, why not give a go developing a nice freehand straight line style? And then you get to choose whichever way is going to work best for you for the effect in the drawing you want at that particular time. Happy straight line drawing. See you next time. Bye.